Day 9. The 7th story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Miette. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. Translated by J.M. Rigg. Day 9, the 7th story. Talano di Molezze dreams that a wolf tears and rends all the neck and face of his wife. He gives her warning thereof, which she heeds not, and the dream comes true.
When Pamphilo had brought his story to a close, and all had commended the good woman's quick perception, the queen bade Pampinea tell hers, and thus Pampinea began.
A while ago, debonair my ladies, we held discourse of the truths that dreams show forth, which not a few of us deride, for which case, albeit the topic has been handled before, I shall not spare to tell you that which not long ago befell a neighbour of mine, for that she disbelieved a dream that her husband had. I wot not if you knew Talano di Molezze, a man worthy to be had in honour, who, having married a young wife, Margarita by name, fair as ever another, but without her match for whimsical, fractious, and perverse humours, insomuch that there was naught she would do at the instance of another, either for his or her own good, found her behaviour most grievous to bear, but was fain to endure what he might not cure. Now it so befell that Talano and Margarita, being together at an estate that Talano had in the Contado, he, sleeping, saw in a dream a very beautiful wood that was on the estate at no great distance from the house, and his lady there walking. And as she went, there leaped forth upon her a huge and fierce wolf, that griped her by the throat and bore her down to the ground, and she, shrieking the while for succour, would have carried her off by main force, but she got quit of his jaws, albeit her neck and face showed as quite disfigured. On the morrow, as soon as he was risen, Talano said to his wife, "Albeit for thy perversity I have not yet known a single good day with thee, yet I should be sorry, wife, that harm should befall thee, and therefore, if thou takest my advice, thou wilt not stir out of doors to-day." "Wherefore?" quoth the lady, and thereupon he recounted to her all his dream. The lady shook her head, saying, "Who means ill, dreams ill. Thou makest as if thou wast mighty tender of me, but thou boastest of me in thy dream that which thou wouldst fain see betide me. I warrant thee that to-day and all days I will have a care to avoid this or any other calamity that might gladden thy heart." Whereupon, "Well wist I," replied Talano, "that thou wouldst so say, for such is ever the requital of those that comb scurfy heads. But whatever thou mayst be pleased to believe, I for my part speak to thee for thy good, and again I advise thee to keep indoors to-day, or at least not to walk in the wood." "Good," returned the lady, "I will look to it." And then she began communing with herself on this wise. "Didst mark how artfully he thinks to have scared me from going into the woods to-day? Doubtless 'tis that he has an assignation there with some light love, with whom he had rather I did not find him. Ah, He would sup well with the blind, and what a fool were I to believe him! But I warrant he will be disappointed, and needs must I, though I stay there all day long, see what commerce it is that he will adventure in to-day." Having so said, she quitted the house on one side, while her husband did so on the other, and forthwith, shunning observation as best she might, she hied her to the woods, and hid where 'twas most dense, and there waited on the alert, and glancing now this way and now that to see if any were coming. And while thus she stood, not even a thought of a wolf crossed her mind. Lo, forth of a close covert hard by came a wolf of monstrous size and appalling aspect, and scarce had she time to say, "God help me," before he sprang upon her and griped her by the throat so tightly that she might not utter a cry, but, passive as any lambkin, was borne off by him, and had certainly been strangled, had he not encountered some shepherds, who with shouts compelled him to let her go. The shepherds recognized the poor hapless woman, and bore her home, where the physicians by dint of long and careful treatment cured her, howbeit the whole of her throat and part of her face remained so disfigured that, fair as she had been before, she was ever thereafter most foul and hideous to look upon. Wherefore, being ashamed to show her face, she did many a time bitterly deplore her perversity, in that, when it would have cost her nothing, she would nevertheless pay no heed to the true dream of her husband. End of Day 9, the 7th story. Recording by Miette of Miette's Bedtime Story Podcast.
Day 9, the 8th story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Philippa Jevons. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. Translated by J. M. Rigg. Day 9, the 8th story. Biondello gulls Ch104 in the matter of a breakfast, for which prank Ch104 is cunningly avenged on Biondello, causing him to be shamefully beaten.
All the company by common consent pronounced it no dream, but a vision that Talano had had in his sleep, so exactly, no circumstance lacking, had it fallen out according as he had seen it. However, as soon as all had done speaking, the queen bade Lauretta follow suit, which Lauretta did on this wise.
As, most discreet my ladies, those that have preceded me today have almost all taken their cue from somewhat that has been said before, so, prompted by the stern vengeance taken by the scholar in Pampinea's narrative of yesterday, I am minded to tell you of a vengeance that was indeed less savage, but for all that grievous enough to him on whom it was wreaked. Wherefore I say that there was once at Florence one that all folk called Ch104, a man second to none that ever lived for inordinate gluttony, who, lacking the means to support the expenditure which his gluttony demanded, and being for the rest well-mannered and well furnished with excellent and merry jests, did, without turning exactly court jester, cultivate a somewhat biting wit, and loved to frequent the houses of the rich and such as kept good tables, whither, bidden or unbidden, he not seldom resorted for breakfast or supper. There was also in those days at Florence one that was called Biondello, a man very short of stature, and not a little debonair, more trim than any fly, with his blond locks surmounted by a coif, and never a hair out of place, and he and Ch104 were two of a trade. Now, one morning in Lent, Biondello, being in the fish market, purchasing 2 mighty fat lampreys for Messer Vieri de' Cerchi, was observed thus engaged by Ch104, who came up to him, and "What means this?" quoth he. "Why," replied Biondello, 'Tis that yestereve Messer Corso Donati had 3 lampreys, much finer than these, and a sturgeon sent to his house; but as they did not suffice for a breakfast that he is to give certain gentlemen, he has commissioned me to buy these 2 beside. Wilt thou not be there?" "Ay, marry, that will I," returned Giaco; and in what he deemed due time he hied him to Messer Corso Donati's house, where he found him with some of his neighbours not yet gone to breakfast. And being asked by Messer Corso with what intent he was come, he answered, "I am come, sir, to breakfast with you and your company." "And welcome art thou," returned Messer Corso. "Go we then to breakfast, for 'tis now the time." So to table they went, where nought was set before them but peas and the inward part of the tunny salted, and afterwards the common fish of the Arno fried. Wherefore Giaco, not a little wroth at the trick that he perceived Biondello had played him, resolved to pay him out. And not many days after, Biondello, who had meanwhile had many a laugh with his friends over Giaco's discomfiture, met him, and after greeting him, asked him with a laugh what Messer Corso's lampreys had been like. "That question," replied Giaco, "thou wilt be able to answer much better than I before 8 days are gone by." And parting from Biondello upon the word, he went forthwith and hired a cozening rogue, and having thrust a glass bottle into his hand, brought him within sight of the Loggia di Cavicciulli, and there, pointing to a knight, one Messer Filippo Argenti, a tall man and stout, and of a high courage, and haughty, choleric, and cross-grained as ne'er another, he said to him, "Thou wilt go flask in hand to Messer Filippo, and wilt say to him, 'I am sent for you, sir, by Biondello, who entreats you to be pleased to colour this flask for him with some of your good red wine, for that he is minded to have a good time with his catamites. And of all things have a care that he lay not hands upon thee, for he would make thee rue the day, and would spoil my sport.'" "Have I aught else to say?" inquired the rogue. "Nothing more," returned Giaco. "And now get thee gone, and when thou hast delivered the message, bring me back the flask, and I will pay thee." So away went the rogue, and did the errand to Messer Filippo, who forthwith, being a hasty man, jumped to the conclusion that Biondello, whom he knew, was making mock of him, and while an angry flush overspread his face, "Colour the flask, forsooth," quoth he, "and catamites! God send thee and him a bad year." And therewith up he started, and reached forward to lay hold of the rogue, who, being on the alert, gave him the slip and was off, and reported Messer Filippo's answer to Giaco, who had observed what had passed. Having paid the rogue, Giaco rested not until he had found Biondello, to whom, "Wast thou but now," quoth he, "at the Loggia di Cavicciulli?" "Indeed, no," replied Biondello. "Wherefore such a question?" "Because," returned Giaco, "I may tell thee that thou art sought for by Messer Filippo, for what cause I know not." "Good," quoth Biondello, "I will go thither and speak with him." So away went Biondello, and Giaco followed him to see what course the affair would take. Now, having failed to catch the rogue, Messer Filippo was still very wroth, and inly fumed and fretted, being unable to make out aught from what the rogue had said, save that Biondello was set on by some one or another to flout him. And while he thus vexed his spirit, up came Biondello, whom he no sooner espied than he made for him, and dealt him a mighty blow in the face, and tore his hair and coif, and cast his capuch on the ground, and to his "Alas, sir, what means this?" still beating him amain, "Traitor!" cried he, "I will give thee to know what it means to send me such a message. Colour the flask, forsooth, and catamites! Dost thou take me for a stripling, to be befooled by thee?" And therewith he pummelled Biondello's face all over with a pair of fists that were liker to iron than aught else, until it was but a mass of bruises. He also tore and dishevelled all his hair, tumbled him in the mud, rent all his clothes upon his back, and that without allowing him breathing space to ask why he thus used him, or so much as utter a word. "Colour me the flask," and "catamites" rang in his ears, but what the words signified he knew not. In the end, very badly beaten, and in very sorry and ragged trim, many folk having gathered around him, they, albeit not without the utmost difficulty, rescued him from Messer Filippo's hands, and told him why Messer Filippo had thus used him, censuring him for sending him such a message, and adding that thenceforth he would know Messer Filippo better, and that he was not a man to be trifled with. Biondello told them in tearful exculpation that he had never sent for wine to Messer Filippo. Then, when they had put him in a little better trim, crestfallen and woebegone, he went home, imputing his misadventure to Ciacco. And when, many days afterwards, the marks of his ill usage being gone from his face, he began to go abroad again, it chanced that Ciacco met him, and with a laugh, "Biondello," quoth he, "how didst thou relish Messer Filippo's wine?" "Why, as to that," replied Biondello, "would thou hadst relished the lampreys of Messer Corso as much." "So," returned Ciacco, "such meat as thou then gavest me, thou mayst henceforth give me as often as thou art so minded, and I will give thee even such drink as I have given thee." So Biondello, witting that against Ciacco his might was not equal to his spite, prayed God for his peace, and was careful never to flout him again. End of Day 9, the 8th story.
Day 9, the 9th story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Anna Simon. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. Translated by J. M. Rigg. Day 9, the 9th story. Two young men ask counsel of Solomon, the one how he is to make himself beloved, the other how he is to reduce an unruly wife to order. The king bids the one to love, and the other to go to the bridge of geese.
None now remained to tell save the queen, unless she were minded to infringe Dionneo's privilege. Wherefore, when the ladies had laughed their fill over the misfortunes of Biondello, thus gaily the queen began.
Observe, we lovesome ladies, the order of things with a sound mind, and we shall readily perceive that we women are one and all subjected by nature and custom and law unto man, by him to be ruled and governed at his discretion. Wherefore she that would fain enjoy quietude and solace and comfort with the man to whom she belongs, ought not only to be chaste, but lowly, patient, and obedient, the which is the discreet wife's chief and most precious possession. And if the laws, which in all matters have regard unto the common weal, and use and wont or custom, call it what you will, a power very great and to be had in awe, should not suffice to school us thereto, yet abundantly clear is the witness of nature, which has fashioned our frames delicate and sensitive, and our spirits timorous and fearful, and has decreed that our bodily strength shall be slight, our voices tunable, and our movements graceful, which qualities do all avouch that we have need of others' governance. And whoso has need of succour and governance ought in all reason to be obedient and submissive and reverent towards his governor. And whom have we to govern and succour us, save men? 'Tis then our bounden duty to give men all honour and submit ourselves unto them, from which rule if any deviate, I deem her most deserving not only of grave censure, but of severe chastisement. Which reflections, albeit they are not new to me, I am now led to make by what but a little while ago Pampinea told us touching the perverse wife of Talano, on whom God bestowed that chastisement which the husband had omitted, and accordingly it jumps with my judgment that all such women as deviate from the graciousness, kindliness, and compliancy which nature and custom and law prescribe, merit, as I said, stern and severe chastisement. Wherefore, as a salutary medicine for the healing of those of us who may be afflicted with this disease, I am minded to relate to you that which was once delivered by Solomon by way of counsel in such a case, which let none that stands not in need of such physic deem to be meant for her, albeit a proverb is current among men, to wit, good steed, bad steed, alike need their rowels prick, good wife, bad wife, alike demand the stick. Which whoso should construe as a merry conceit would find you all ready enough to acknowledge its truth, but even in its moral significance I say that it ought to command assent. For women are all by nature apt to be swayed and to fall, and therefore for the correction of the wrongdoing of such as transgress the bounds assigned to them, there is need of the stick punitive, and also for the maintenance of virtue in others, that they transgress not these appointed bounds, there is need of the stick auxiliary and deterrent. However, to cut short this preachment, and to come to that which I propose to tell you, I say, that the bruit of the incomparable renown of the prodigious wisdom of Solomon, as also of the exceeding great liberality with which he accorded proof thereof to all that craved such assurance, being gone forth over well nigh all the earth, many from divers parts were wont to resort to him for counsel in matters of most pressing and arduous importance, among whom was a young man, Melisso by name, a very wealthy nobleman, who was, as had been his fathers before him, of Lazistan, and there dwelt. And as Melisso fared toward Jerusalem, on his departure from Antioch, he fell in with another young man, Josepho by name, who was going the same way, and with whom, after the manner of travellers, he entered into converse. Melisso, having learned from Josepho who and whence he was, asked him whither he went and on what errand, whereupon Josepho made an answer that he was going to seek counsel of Solomon, how he should deal with his wife, who had not her match among women for unruliness and perversity, insomuch that neither entreaties nor blandishments nor aught else availed him to bring her to a better frame. And thereupon he in like manner asked Melisso whence he was, and whither he was bound, and on what errand. Whereto, "Of Lazistan I," replied Melisso, "and like thyself in evil plight, for albeit I am wealthy and spend my substance freely in hospitably entertaining and honourably entreating my fellow citizens, yet for all that, passing strange though it be to think upon, I find never a soul to love me, and therefore I am bound to the selfsame place as thou, to be advised how it may come to pass that I be loved." So the two men fared on together, and being arrived at Jerusalem, were, by the good offices of one of Solomon's barons, ushered into his presence, and Melisso having briefly laid his case before the king, was answered in one word, "Love." Which said, Melisso was forthwith dismissed, and Josepho discovered the reason of his coming. To whom Solomon made no answer but, "Get thee to the bridge of geese." Whereupon Josepho was likewise promptly ushered out of the king's presence, and finding Melisso awaiting him, told him what manner of answer he had gotten. Which utterances of the king the two men pondered, but finding therein naught that was helpful or relevant to their need, they doubted the king had but mocked them, and set forth upon their homeward journey. Now when they had been some days on the road, they came to a river, which was spanned by a fine bridge, and a great caravan of sumpter mules and horses being about to cross, they must needs tarry until the caravan had passed by. The more part of which had done so, when it chanced that a mule turned sulky, as we know they will not seldom do, and stood stock still, wherefore a muleteer took a stick and fell a-beating the mule therewith, albeit at first with no great vigour, to urge the mule forward. The mule, however, swerving now to this, now to the other side of the bridge, and sometimes facing about, utterly refused to go forward, whereat the muleteer, wroth beyond measure, fell a-belabouring him with the stick now on the head, now on the flanks, and anon on the croup, never so lustily, but all to no purpose. Which caused Melisso and Josepho ofttimes to say to him, "How now, caitiff, what is this thou doest? Wouldst kill the beast? Why not try if thou canst not manage him kindly and gently, who would start sooner so than for this cudgelling of thine?" To whom, "You know your horses," replied the muleteer, "and I know my mule. Leave me to deal with him." Which said, he resumed his cudgelling of the mule, and laid about him on this side and on that to such purpose that he started him, and so the honours of the day rested with the muleteer. Now as the two young men were leaving the bridge behind them, Josepho asked the good man that sate at his head what the bridge was called, and was answered, "Sir, 'tis called the bridge of geese." Which Josepho no sooner heard than he called to mind Solomon's words, and turning to Melisso, "Now, comrade, I warrant thee I may yet find Solomon's counsel sound and good, for that I knew not how to beat my wife is abundantly clear to me, and this muleteer has shown me what I have to do." Now some days afterwards they arrived at Antioch, where Josepho prevailed upon Melisso to tarry with him and rest a day or two, and meeting with but a sorry welcome on the part of his wife, he told her to take her orders as to supper from Melisso, who, seeing that such was Josepho's will, briefly gave her his instructions, which the lady, as had been her wont, not only did not obey, but contravened in almost every particular. Which Josepho marking, "Wast thou not told," quoth he angrily, "after what fashion thou wast to order the supper?" Whereto, "So," replied the lady haughtily, "what means this? If thou hast a mind to sup, Why take not thy supper? No matter what I was told, 'tis thus I saw fit to order it. If it like thee, so be it; if not, 'tis thine affair." Melissa heard the lady with surprise and inward disapprobation. Josepho retorted, "Ay, wife, thou art still as thou wast used to be, but I will make thee mend thy manners." Then, turning to Melissa, "Friend," quoth he, "thou wilt soon prove the worth of Solomon's counsel. But, prithee, let it not irk thee to look on, and deem that what I shall do is but done in sport; and if thou shouldst be disposed to stand in my way, bear in mind how we were answered by the muleteer, when we pitied his mule." "I am in thy house," replied Melissa, "and thy pleasure is to me law." Thereupon Josepho took a stout cudgel cut from an oak sapling, and hied him into the room whither the lady had withdrawn from the table in high dudgeon, seized her by the hair, threw her on the floor at his feet, and fell a beating her amain with the cudgel. The lady at first uttered a shriek or two, from which she passed to threats, but seeing that, for all that, Josepho slackened not, by the time she was thoroughly well thrashed, she began to cry him mercy, imploring him not to kill her, and adding that henceforth his will should be to her for law. But still Josepho gave not over, but with every fresh fury dealt her mighty swinging blows, now about the ribs, now on the haunches, now over the shoulders. Nor had he done with the fair lady, until in short he had left never a bone or other part of her person whole, and he was fairly spent. Then returning to Melissa, "Tomorrow," quoth he, "we shall see whether get thee to the bridge of geese will prove to have been sound advice or no." And so, having rested a while, and then washed his hands, he supped with Melissa. With great pain the poor lady got upon her feet, and laid herself on her bed, and having there taken such rest as she might, rose betimes on the morrow, and craved to know of Josepho what he was minded to have to breakfast. Josepho, laughing with Melissa over the message, gave her his directions, and when in due time they came to breakfast, they found everything excellently ordered according as it had been commanded, for which cause the counsel, which they had at first failed to understand, now received their highest commendation. Some few days later, Melissa, having taken leave of Josepho, went home, and told the wise man the counsel he had gotten from Solomon. Whereupon, "And no truer or sounder advice could he have given thee," quoth the sage. "Thou knowest that thou lovest never a soul, and that the honours thou payest and the services thou renderest to others are not prompted by love of them, but by love of display. Love then, as Solomon bade thee, and thou shalt be loved." On such wise was the unruly chastised, and the young man, learning to love, was beloved. End of Day 9, the 9th story.
Day 9, the 10th story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For further information, or to volunteer, please go to LibriVox.org. Reading by Andy Minter. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. Translated by J. M. Rigg. Day 9, the 10th story. Don Gianni, at the instance of his gossip Pietro, uses an enchantment to transform Pietro's wife into a mare, but when he comes to attach the tail, gossip Pietro, by saying that he will have none of the tail, makes the enchantment of no effect.
The Queen's story evoked some murmurs from the ladies and some laughter from the young men. However, when they were silent, Dioneo thus began.
Dainty my ladies, a black crow amongst a flock of white doves enhances their beauty more than would a white swan, and so, when many sages are met together, their right wisdom not only shows the brighter and goodlier for the presence of one that is not so wise, but may even derive pleasure and diversion therefrom. Wherefore, as you, my ladies, are one and all most discreet and judicious, I, who know myself to be somewhat scant of sense, should, for that by my demerit I make your merit show the more glorious, be more dear to you than if by my greater merit I eclipsed yours, and by consequence should have more ample licence to reveal myself to you as I am, and therefore have more patient sufferance on your part than would be due to me were I more discreet in the relation of the tale which I am about to tell you. 'Twill be then a story none too long, wherefrom you may gather with what exactitude it behoves folk to observe the injunctions of those that for any purpose use an enchantment, and how slight an error committed therein may bring to naught all the work of the enchanter. A year or so ago there was at Barletta a priest named Don Giovanni de Barolo, who, to eke out the scanty pittance his church afforded him, set a pack saddle upon his mare, and took to going the round of the fairs of Apulia, buying and selling merchandise. And so it befell that he clapped up a close acquaintance with one Pietro de Tresanti, who plied the same trade as he, albeit instead of a mare he had but an ass, whom in token of friendship and good fellowship Don Giovanni, after the Apulian fashion, called ever Gossip Pietro, and had him to his house, and there lodged and honourably entreated him as often as he came to Barletta. Gossip Pietro, on his part, albeit he was very poor, and had but a little cot at Tresanti that scarce sufficed for himself, his fair young wife, and their ass, nevertheless, when Don Giovanni arrived at Tresanti, made him welcome, and did him the honours of his house as best he might, in requital of the hospitality which he received at Barletta. However, as Gossip Pietro had but one little bed in which he slept with his fair wife, 'twas not in his power to lodge Don Giovanni as comfortably as he would have liked. But the priest's mare being quartered beside the ass in a little stable, the priest himself must needs lie beside her on the straw. Many a time when the priest came, the wife, knowing how honourably he entreated her husband at Barletta, would fain have gone to sleep with a neighbour, one Zita Capressa di Giudice Leo, that the priest might share the bed with her husband, and many a time had she told the priest so. Howbeit he would never agree to it, and on one occasion, "Gossip Giamata," quoth he, "trouble not thyself about me, I am well lodged, for when I am so minded, I turn the mare into a fine lass, and dally with her, and then when I would I turn her back into a mare, wherefore I could ill brook to part from her." The young woman, wondering, but believing, told her husband what the priest had said, adding, "If he is even such a friend as thou sayest, why dost thou not get him to teach thee the enchantment, so that thou mayst turn me into a mare, and have both ass and mare for thine occasions? We should then make twice as much gain as we do, and thou couldst turn me back into a woman when we came home at night." Gossip Pietro, whose wit was somewhat blunt, believed that 'twas as she said, approved her counsel, and began adjuring Don Giovanni as persuasively as he might to teach him the incantation. Don Giovanni did his best to wean him of his folly, but, as all was in vain, "Lo now," quoth he, "as you are both bent on it, we will be up, as it is our wont, before the sun to-morrow morning, and I will show you how 'tis done. The truth is that 'tis in the attachment of the tail that the great difficulty lies, as thou wilt see." Scarce a wink of sleep had either Gossip Pietro or Gossip Giamata that night, so great was their anxiety, and towards daybreak up they got and called Don Giovanni, who, being risen, came in his shirt into Gossip Pietro's little bedroom, and "I know not," quoth he, "that there is another soul in the world for whom I would do this, save you, my gossips. However, as you will have it so, I will do it, but it behoves you to do exactly as I bid you, if you would have the enchantment work." They promised obedience, and Don Giovanni thereupon took a light, which he handed to Gossip Pietro, saying, "Let naught that I shall do or say escape thee, and have a care so thou wouldst not ruin all to say never a word, whatever thou mayst see or hear, and pray God that the tail may be securely attached." So Gossip Pietro took the light, and again promised obedience. Don Giovanni caused Gossip Giamata to strip herself stark naked, and stand on all fours like a mare, at the same time strictly charging her that whatever might happen she must utter no word. Then, touching her head and face, "Be this a fine head of a mare?" quoth he. In like manner, touching her hair, he said, "Be this a fine mane of a mare?" Touching her arms, "Be these fine legs and fine hoofs of a mare?" Then, as he touched her breast and felt its firm roundness, and there awoke and arose one that was not called, "And be this a fine breast of a mare," quoth he, and in like manner he dealt with her back, belly, croup, thighs, and legs. Last of all, the work being complete, save for the tail, he lifted his shirt, and took in his hand the tool with which he was used to plant men, and forthwith thrust it into the furrow made for it, saying, "And be this a fine tail of a mare." Whereat gossip Pietro, who had followed everything very heedfully to that point, disapproving that last particular, exclaimed, "No, Don Giovanni, I'll have no tail, I'll have no tail." The essential juice by which all plants are propagated was already discharged when Don Giovanni withdrew the tool, saying, "Alas, gossip Pietro, what hast thou done? Did I not tell thee to say never a word, no matter what thou mightst see? The mare was all but made, but by speaking thou hast spoiled all, and 'tis not possible to repeat the enchantment." "Well and good," replied gossip Pietro. "I would have none of that tail. Why saidst thou not to me, make it thou? And besides, thou wast attaching it too low." "'Twas because," returned Don Giovanni, "thou wouldst not have known on the first essay how to attach it so well as I." Whereupon the young woman stood up, and in all good faith said to her husband, "Fool that thou art, wherefore hast thou brought to naught what had been for the good of us both? When didst thou ever see mare without a tail? So help me God, poor as thou art, thou deservest to be poorer still." So, after gossip Pietro's ill-timed speech, there being no way left of turning the young woman into a mare, downcast and melancholy she resumed her clothes, and gossip Pietro plied his old trade with his ass, and went with Don Giovanni to the fair of Bitonto, and never asked him to so serve him again. End of Day 9, the 10th story.
Day 9. The conclusion of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. Translated by H. M. Rigg. Day 9. The conclusion. What laughter this story drew from the ladies, who understood it better than Dioneo had wished, may be left to the imagination of the fair one that now laughs thereat. However, as the stories were ended, and the sun now shone with a tempered radiance, the queen, witting that the end of her sovereignty was come, stood up and took off the crown, and set it on the head of Pamphilo, whom alone it now remained thus to honour, and said with a smile, "My lord, 'tis a great burden that falls upon thee, seeing that thou, coming last, art bound to make good my shortcomings and those of my predecessors, which God give thee grace to accomplish, even as he has given me grace to make thee king." "With gladsome acknowledgment of the honour, I doubt not," replied Pamphilo, "that, thanks to your noble qualities and those of my other subjects, I shall win even such praise as those that have borne sway before me." Then, following the example of his predecessors, he made all meet arrangements in concert with the seneschal, after which he turned to the expectant ladies and thus spoke: "Enamoured my ladies, Emilia, our queen of today, deeming it proper to allow you an interval of rest to recruit your powers, gave you license to discourse of such matters as should most commend themselves to each in turn; and as thereby you are now rested, I judge that it is meet to revert to our accustomed rule; wherefore I ordain that for tomorrow you do each of you take thought how you may discourse of the ensuing theme, to wit, of such as in matters of love or otherwise have done something with liberality or magnificence. By the telling, and still more by the doing of such things, your spirits will assuredly be duly attuned and animated to emprise high and noble, whereby our life, which cannot be but brief, seeing that it is enshrined in a mortal body, fame shall perpetuate in glory, which whoso serves not the belly as do the beasts, must not only covet, but with all zeal seek after and labour to attain." The gay company having, one and all, approved the theme, rose at a word from their new king, and betook them to their wonted pastimes, and so according as they severally had most leave, diverted them, until they blithely reunited for supper, which being served with all due care and dispatched, they rose up to dance, as they were wont, and when they had sung perhaps 1,000 ditties, fitter to please by their words than by any excellence of musical art, the king bade Nephila sing one of her own account, and promptly and graciously, with voice clear and blithe, thus Nephila sang:
In prime of maidenhood, and fair and feet, mid spring's fresh foison, chant I merrily, thanks be to love, and to my fancies sweet. As o'er the grassy mead I, glancing fair, I mark it white and yellow and vermil, dight with flowers, the thorny rose, the lily white. And all alike to his face I compare, who, loving, hath me tame, and me shall e'er hold bounden to his will, sith I am she that in his will findeth her joy complete. Whereof, if so it be that I do find any that I most like to him approve, that pluck I straight, and kiss with words of love, discovering all, as best I may, my mind, yea, all my heart's desire. And then entwined I set it in the chaplet daintily, and with my yellow tresses bind and pleat. And as mine eyes do drink in the delight which the flower yields them, even so my mind, fired with his sweet love, doth such solace find, as he himself were present to the sight. But never word of mine discover might that which the flower's sweet smell awakes in me. Witness the true tale that my sighs repeat. For from my bosom gentle and hot they fly, not like the gusty sighs that others heave, whenas they languish and do sorely grieve, and to my love incontinent they hie, whereof when he is ware, he by and by to me ward hasting cometh suddenly, when, lest I faint, I cry, come, I entreat.
The king and all the ladies did not a little commend Nephila's song, after which, as the night was far spent, the king bade all go to rest until the morrow. End of the conclusion of the 9th day. Day 10. The Introduction of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. 10th Day. The Introduction. Endeth here the 9th day of the Decameron, and beginneth the 10th, in which, under the rule of Pamphilo, discourse is had of such as in matters of love, or otherwise, have done something with liberality or magnificence. Some cloudlets in the west still shewed a vermeil flush, albeit those of the eastern sky, as the sun's rays smote them anear, were already fringed as with most lucent gold, when uprose Pamphilo and roused the ladies and his comrades. And all the company being assembled, and choice made of the place whither they should betake them for their diversion, he, accompanied by Philomela and Fiametta, led the way at a slow pace, followed by all the rest. So feared they no little space, beguiling the time with talk of their future way of life, whereof there was much to tell and much to answer, until as the sun gained strength they returned, having made quite a long round, to the palace. And being gathered about the fountain, such as were so minded drank somewhat from beakers rinsed in its pure waters, and then in the delicious shade of the garden they hied them hither and thither, taking their pleasure until breakfast time. Their meal taken, they slept as they were wont, and then, at a spot chosen by the king, they reassembled, where Nephila, having received his command to lead the way, blithely thus began. End of the introduction of the day 10.
Day 10, the first story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ruth Golding. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio, translated by J.M. Rigg. Day 10, the first story. A knight in the service of the King of Spain deems himself ill requited, wherefore the King by most cogent proof shows him that the blame rests not with him, but with the knight's own evil fortune, after which he bestows upon him a noble gift. Highly graced indeed do I deem myself, honourable my ladies, that our King should have given to me the precedence in a matter so arduous to tell of as magnificence. For as the sun irradiates all the heaven with his glory and beauty, even so does magnificence enhance the purity and the splendour of every other virtue. I shall therefore tell you a story which to my thinking is not a little pretty, and which assuredly it must be profitable to call to mind. You are to know then that among other honourable knights that from days of old even until now have dwelt in our city, one, and perchance the worthiest of all, was Messer Ruggieri de Figiovanni, who, being wealthy and magnanimous, reflecting on the customs and manner of life of Tuscany, perceived that by tarrying there he was like to find little or no occasion of showing his mettle, and accordingly resolved to pass some time at the court of Alfonso, King of Spain, who, for the fame of his high qualities, was without a peer among the potentates of his age. So, being well provided with arms and horses and retinue suitable to his rank, he hied him to Spain, where he was graciously received by the king. There tarrying accordingly, Messer Ruggieri very soon, as well by the splendid style in which he lived, as by the prodigious feats of arms that he did, gave folk to know his high desert. Now, having tarried there some while, and observed the king's ways with much care, and how he would grant castles, cities, or baronies to this, that, or the other of his subjects, he deemed that the king showed therein but little judgment, seeing that he would give them to men that merited them not, and for that naught was given to him, he, knowing his merit, deemed himself gravely injured in reputation. Wherefore he made up his mind to depart the realm, and to that end craved licence of the king, which the king granted him, and therewith gave him one of the best and finest mules that was ever ridden, a gift which Messer Ruggieri, as he had a long journey to make, did not a little appreciate. The king then bade one of his discreet domestics contrive, as best he might, to ride with Messer Ruggieri, on such wise that it might not appear that he did so by the king's command, and charge his memory with whatever Messer Ruggieri might say of him, so that he might be able to repeat it. Which done, he was, on the very next morning, to bid Ruggieri return to the king forthwith. The king's agent was on the alert, and no sooner was Ruggieri out of the city than without any manner of difficulty he joined his company, giving out that he was going towards Italy. As thus they rode, talking of divers matters, Messer Ruggieri being mounted on the mule given him by the king, "Methinks," quoth the other, it being then hard upon tierce, "that 'twere well to give the beasts avoidance." And by, being come to a convenient place, they voided all the beasts, save the mule. Then, as they continued their journey, the squire hearkening attentively to the knight's words, they came to a river, and while there they watered the beasts, the mule made avoidance in the stream. Whereat, "Ah, foul fall thee, beast," quoth Messer Ruggieri, "that art even as thy master that gave thee to me." Which remark, as also many another that fell from Ruggieri as they rode together throughout the day, the squire stored in his memory. But never another word did he hear Ruggieri say touching the king that was not laudatory to the last degree. On the morrow, when they were gotten to horse, and had set their faces towards Tuscany, the squire apprised Ruggieri of the king's command, and thereupon Ruggieri turned back. On his arrival, the king, having already heard what he had said touching the mule, gave him gladsome greeting, and asked him wherefore he had likened him to the mule, or rather the mule to him. Whereto Messer Ruggieri answered frankly, "My lord, I likened you to the mule, for that, as you bestow your gifts where 'tis not meet, and where meet it were, bestow them not, so the mule, where 'twas meet, voided not, and where 'twas not meet, voided." "Messer Ruggieri," replied the king, "'tis not because I have not discerned in you a knight most good and true, for whose desert no gift were too great, that I have not bestowed on you such gifts as I have bestowed upon many others, who in comparison of you are nothing worth. The fault is none of mine, but solely of your fortune, which would not suffer me, and that this which I say is true I will make abundantly plain to you." "My lord," returned Messer Ruggieri, "mortified am I, not that you gave me no gift, for thereof I had no desire, being too rich, but that you made no sign of recognition of my desert. However, I deem your explanation sound and honourable, and whatever you shall be pleased that I should see, that gladly will I, albeit I believe you without attestation." The king then led him into one of the great halls, in which by his preordinance were 2 chests, closed under lock and key, and, not a few others being present, said to him, "Messer Ruggieri, one of these chests contains my crown, sceptre, and orb, with many a fine girdle, buckle, ring, and whatever else of jewellery I possess. The other is full of earth. Choose then, and whichever you shall choose, be it yours. Thereby you will discover whether 'tis due to me or to your fortune that your deserts have lacked requital." Such being the king's pleasure, Messer Ruggieri chose one of the chests, which at the king's command being opened, and found to be that which contained the earth, "Now, Messer Ruggieri," quoth the king with a laugh, "your own eyes may warrant you of the truth of what I say touching fortune. But verily your merit demands that I take arms against her in your cause. I know that you are not minded to become a Spaniard, and therefore I shall give you neither castle nor city, but that chest which fortune denied you I bestow on you in her despite, that you may take it with you to your own country, and there with your neighbours justly vaunt yourself of your deserts, attested by my gifts." Messer Ruggieri took the chest, and having thanked the king in a manner befitting such a gift, returned therewith, well pleased, to Tuscany. End of Day 10, the first story. Recording by Ruth Golding.
Day 10, the second story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio, translated by J.M. Rigg. Day 10, the second story. Gino di Tacco captures the abbot of Cluny, cures him of a disorder of the stomach, and releases him. The abbot, on his return to the court of Rome, reconciles Gino with Pope Boniface and makes him prior of the hospital.
When an end was made of extolling the magnificence shown by King Alfonso towards the Florentine knight, the king, who had listened to the story with no small pleasure, bade Elisa follow suit, and forthwith Elisa began.
Dainty my ladies, undeniable it is that for a king to be magnificent, and to entreat magnificently one that has done him service, is a great matter, and meet for commendation. What then shall we say when the tale is of a dignitary of the church, that showed wondrous magnificence towards one whom he might well have entreated as an enemy, and not have been blamed by a soul? Assuredly not else than that what in the king was virtue was in the prelate nothing less than a miracle, seeing that for superlative greed the clergy, one and all, outdo us as women, and wage war to the knife upon every form of liberality. And albeit all men are by nature prone to avenge their wrongs, 'tis notorious that the clergy, however they may preach long suffering and commend of all things the forgiving of trespasses, are more quick and hot to be avenged than the rest of mankind. Now this, to wit, after what manner a prelate showed magnificence, will be made manifest to you in my story. Gino di Tacco, a man redoubtable by reason of his truculence and his high-handed deeds, being banished from Siena and at enmity with the counts of Santa Fiore, raised Radicofani in revolt against the Church of Rome, and there abiding, harried all the surrounding country with his soldiers, plundering all wayfarers. Now Pope Boniface VIII being at Rome, there came to court the abbot of Cluny, who is reputed one of the wealthiest prelates in the world, and having there gotten a disorder of the stomach, he was advised by the physicians to go to the baths of Siena, where, they averred, he would certainly be cured. So having obtained the Pope's leave, reckless of the bruit of Gino's exploits, he took the road, being attended by a great and well-equipped train of sumpter horses and servants. Gino di Tacco, getting wind of his approach, spread his nets to such purpose as without the loss of so much as a boy to surround the abbot with all his servants and effects in a straight pass from which there was no exit. Which done, he sent one of his men, the cunningest of them all, with a sufficient retinue to the abbot, who most lovingly in Gino's part besought the abbot to come and visit Gino at the castle. Whereto the abbot, very wroth, made answer that he would none of it, for that naught had he to do with Gino, but that he purposed to continue his journey, and would fain see who would hinder him. Sir, returned the envoy, assuming a humble tone, you are come to a part of the country where we have no fear of aught save the might of God, and where excommunications and interdicts are one and all under the ban. Wherefore you were best be pleased to show yourself agreeable to Gino in this particular. As they thus spoke, Gino's soldiers showed themselves on every side, and it being thus manifest to the abbot that he and his company were taken prisoners, he, albeit mightily incensed, suffered himself with all his train and effects to be conducted by the envoy to the castle, where the abbot, being alighted, was lodged in a small and very dark and discomfortable room, while his retinue, according to their several conditions, were provided with comfortable quarters in divers parts of the castle, the horses well stabled, and all the effects secured, none being in any wise tampered with. Which done, Gino hied him to the abbot, and, Sir, quoth he, Gino, whose guest you are, sends me to entreat you to be pleased to inform him of your destination, and the purpose of your journey. The abbot, veiling his pride like a wise man, told whither he was bound and for what purpose. Whereupon Gino left him, casting about how he might cure him without a bath. To which end he kept a great fire ever burning in the little chamber, and had it closely guarded, and returned not to the abbot until the ensuing morning, when he brought him in a spotless napkin 2 slices of toast and a great beaker of vernaccia of Corniglia, being of the abbot's own vintage. And, Sir, quoth he to the abbot, Gino as a young man made his studies in medicine, and avers that he then learned that there is no better treatment for disorder of the stomach than that which he will afford you, whereof the matters that I bring you are the beginning, wherefore take them and be of good cheer. The abbot, being far too hungry to make many words about the matter, ate, albeit in high dudgeon, the toast, and drank the vernaccia. Which done, he enlarged on his wrongs in a high note, with much questioning and perpending, and above all he demanded to see Gino. Part of what the abbot said Gino disregarded as of no substance. To other part he replied courteously enough, and having assured him that Gino would visit him as soon as might be, he took his leave of him, nor did he return until the morrow, when he brought him toast and vernaccia in the same quantity as before. And so he kept him several days. Then, having marked that the abbot had eaten some dried beans that he had secretly brought and left there of set purpose, he asked him in Gino's name how he felt in the stomach. "Were I but out of Gino's hands," replied the abbot, "I should feel myself well indeed, next to which I desire most of all a good breakfast, so excellent a cure have his medicines wrought on me." Whereupon Gino caused the abbot's servants to furnish a goodly chamber with the abbot's own effects, and there on the morrow make ready a grand banquet, at which all the abbot's suite and not a few of the garrison being assembled, he hied them to the abbot, and, "Sir," quoth he, "'tis time you left the infirmary, seeing that you now feel yourself well." And so saying, he took him by the hand, and led him into the chamber made ready for him, and having left him there with his own people, made it his chief concern that the banquet should be magnificent. The abbot's spirits revived as he found himself again among his men, with whom he talked a while, telling them how he had been entreated, wherewith they contrasted the signal honor which they, on the other hand, had, one and all, received from Gino. Breakfast time came, and with order meet the abbot and the rest were regaled with good viands and good wines, Gino still suffering not the abbot to know who he was. But when the abbot had thus passed several days, Gino, having first had all his effects collected in a saloon, and all his horses to the poorest jade in the courtyard below, hied him to the abbot and asked him how he felt, and if he deemed himself strong enough to ride. The abbot replied that he was quite strong enough, and that 'twould be well indeed with him were he once out of Gino's hands. Gino then led him into the saloon in which were his effects and all his retinue, and having brought him to a window whence he might see all his horses, "Sir abbot," quoth he, "you must know that 'tis not for that he has an evil heart, but because, being a gentleman, he is banished from his home and reduced to poverty, and has not a few powerful enemies, that in defense of his life and honor, Gino di Tacco, whom you see before you, has become a robber of highways and an enemy to the court of Rome. But such as I am, I have cured you of your malady of the stomach, and taking you to be a worthy lord, I purpose not to treat you as I would another, from whom, were he in my hands as you are, I should take such part of his goods as I should think fit, but I shall leave it to you, upon consideration of my need, to assign to me such portion of your goods as you yourself shall determine. Here are they before you undiminished and unimpaired, and from this window you may see your horses below in the courtyard. Wherefore take the part or take the whole, as you may see fit, and be it at your option to tarry here or go hence from this hour forth." The abbot marveled to hear a highway robber speak thus liberally, and such was his gratification that his wrath and fierce resentment departed from him, nay, were transformed into kindness, insomuch that in all cordial amity he hasted to embrace Gino, saying, "By God I swear that to gain the friendship of a man such I now deem thee to be, I would be content to suffer much greater wrong than that which until now meseemed thou hadst done me. Cursed be fortune that constrains thee to ply so censurable a trade." Which said, he selected a very few things, and none superfluous, from his ample store, and having done likewise with the horses, ceded all else to Gino, and hid him back to Rome. Where, seeing him, the Pope, who to his great grief had heard of his capture, asked him what benefit he had gotten from the baths. Whereto the abbot made answer with a smile, "Holy Father, I found nearer here than the baths a worthy physician who has wrought a most excellent cure on me." He then recounted all the circumstances, whereat the Pope laughed, Afterwards, still pursuing the topic, the abbot, yielding to the promptings of magnificence, asked a favor of the Pope, who, expecting that he would ask somewhat else than he did, liberally promised to give him whatever he should demand. Whereupon, "Holy Father," quoth the abbot, "that which I would crave of you is that you restore Gino di Tacco, my physician, to your favor, seeing that among the good men and true and meritorious that I have known, he is by no means of the least account, and for the evil life that he leads I impute it to fortune rather than to him. Change then his fortune by giving him the means whereby he may live in manner befitting his rank, and I doubt not that in a little while your judgment of him will jump with mine." Whereto the Pope, being magnanimous and an admirer of good men and true, made answer that so he would gladly do, if Gino should prove to be such as the abbot said, and that he would have him brought under safe conduct to Rome. Thither accordingly under safe conduct came Gino, to the abbot's great delight, nor had he been long at court before the Pope approved his worth, and restored him to his favor, granting him a great office, to wit, that of prior of the hospital, whereof he made him knight, which office he held for the rest of his life, being ever a friend and a vassal of Holy Church and the abbot of Cluny. End of Day 10, the second story.
Day 10, the third story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. Translated by J.M. Rigg. Day 10, the third story. Mithridates, holding Nathan in despite by reason of his courtesy, journeys with intent to kill him, and falling in with him unawares, is advised by him how to compass his end. Following his advice, he finds in him a caups, and, recognizing him, is shame-stricken, and becomes his friend.
Verily like to a miracle seemed it to all to hear that the prelate had done aught with magnificence. But when the ladies had made an end of their remarks, the king bade Philostrato follow suit, and forthwith Philostrato began.
Noble ladies, great was the magnificence of the King of Spain, and perchance a thing unheard of, the magnificence of the abbot of Cluny. But peradventure 'twill seem not a whit less marvellous to you to hear of one who, to show liberality towards another, did resolve artfully to yield to him his blood, nay, his very life, for which the other thirsted, and had so done, had the other chosen to take them, as I shall show you in a little story. Beyond all question, if we may believe the report of a certain Genoese, and other folk that have been in those regions, there dwelt of yore in the parts of Cathay one Nathan, a man of noble lineage and incomparable wealth, who, having a seat hard by a road, by which whoso would travel from the west eastward, or from the east westward, must needs pass, and being magnanimous and liberal, and zealous to approve himself such an act, did set on work, cutting artificers, not a few, and cause one of the finest and largest and most luxurious palaces that were ever seen to be there built, and furnished in the goodliest manner with all things meet for the reception and honorable entertainment of gentlemen. And so, keeping a great array of excellent servants, he courteously and hospitably did the honors of his house to whoso came and went, in which laudable way of life he persevered, not until only the east, but well nigh all the west had heard of his fame, which thus, what time he was well stricken in years, albeit not for that cause grown weary of showing courtesy, reached the ears of one Mithridates, a young man of a country not far distant, who, knowing himself to be no one less wealthy than Nathan, grew envious of the renown that he had of his good deeds, and resolved to obliterate, or at least to obscure it, by a yet greater liberality. So he had built for himself a palace like that of Nathan, of which he did the honors with a lavish courtesy that none ever equalled to whosoever came or went that way, and verily in a short while he became famous enough. Now it so befell that on a day when the young man was all alone in the courtyard of the palace, there came in by one of the gates a poor woman, who asked him an alms, and had it, but not content therein, came again to him by the second gate, and asked another alms, and had it, and after the like sort did even unto the 12th time. But she returning for the 13th time, My good woman, quoth Mithridates, thou art not a little pertinacious in thy begging. Howbeit he gave her an alms. Whereupon, Ah, the wondrous liberality of Nathan, quoth the beldam, 32 gates are there to his palace, by which every one of them I have entered, and asking alms of him was never, for aught he showed, recognized or refused. And here, though I have entered as yet by but 13 gates, I am recognized and reprimanded. And therewith she departed, and returned no more. Mithridates, who accounted the mention of Nathan's fame as an abatement of his own, was kindled by her words with a frenzy of wrath, and began thus to commune with himself. Alas, what shall I attain to the grandeur of Nathan's liberality, to say naught of transcending it, as I would fain, seeing that in the veriest trifles I cannot approach him? Of a surety my labour is in vain, if I rid not the earth of him, which, since old age relieves me not of him, I must forthwith do with my own hands. And, in the flush of his despite, up he started, and giving no one to know of his purpose, got to horse with a small company, and after 3 days arrived at the palace where Nathan abode, and having enjoined his comrades to make as if they were none of his, and knew him not, and to go quarter themselves as best they might until they had his further orders, he, being thus alone, towards evening came upon Nathan, who, also alone, at no great distance from his splendid palace. Nathan was recreating himself by a walk, and was very simply clad, so that Mithridates, knowing him not, asked him if he could show him where Nathan dwelt. My son, replied Nathan gladsomely, that can none in these parts better than I. So it please thee, I will bring thee thither. The young man replied that 'twould be mighty agreeable to him, but that, if so it might be, he had a mind to be neither known nor seen by Nathan. And herein also, returned Nathan, since 'tis thy pleasure, I will gratify thee. Whereupon Mithridates dismounted, and, with Nathan, who soon engaged him in delightsome discourse, walked to the goodly palace. Arrived there, Nathan caused one of his servants to take the young man's horse, and drawing close to him, bade him in a whisper to see to it without delay that none in the house should tell the young man that he was Nathan, and so 'twas done. Being come into the palace, Nathan quartered Mithridates in a most goodly chamber, where none saw him but those whom he had appointed to wait upon him, and himself kept him company, doing him all possible honour. Of whom Mithridates, albeit he reverenced him as a father, yet being thus with him, forbore not to ask who he was. Whereto Nathan made answer, I am a petty servant of Nathan. Old as I am, I have been with him since my childhood, and never has he advanced me to higher office than this, wherein thou seest me. Wherefore, whosoever other folk may praise him, little cause have I to do so. Which words afforded Mithridates some hope of carrying his wicked purpose into effect with more of plan and less of risk than had been otherwise possible. By and by Nathan very courteously asked him who he was, and what business brought him thither, offering him such counsel and aid as he might be able to afford him. Mithridates hesitated a while to reply, but at last he resolved to trust him, and when, with no little circumlocution, he demanded of him fidelity, counsel, and aid, he fully discovered to him who he was, and the purpose and motive of his coming thither. Now, albeit to hear Mithridates thus unfold his horrid design caused Nathan no small inward commotion, yet 'twas not long before courageously and composedly he thus made answer. Noble was thy father, Mithridates, and thou art minded to show thyself not unworthy of him by this lofty emprise of thine, to wit, of being liberal to all comers. For that thou art envious of Nathan's merit, and I greatly commend thee. For were many envious of a like cause, the world, from being a most wretched, would soon become a most happy place. Doubt not that I shall keep secret the design that thou hast confided to me, for the furtherance whereof 'tis a mile off, thou may seest a corpse, in which almost every morning Nathan is wont to walk, taking his pleasure for quite a long time. 'Twill be an easy matter for thee to find him there, and deal with him as thou mayest be minded. Now, shouldest thou slay him, thou wilt get thee home with less risk of let, if thou take not the path by which thou camest hither, but that which thou seest issue from the corpse on the left. For, though 'tis somewhat more rough, it leads more directly to thy house, and will be safer for thee. Possessed of this information, Mithridates, when Nathan had left him, privily apprised his comrades, who were likewise lodged in the palace, of the place where they were to await him on the ensuing day, which being come, Nathan inflexibly determined to act in all respects according to the advice which he had given Mithridates, hied him forth to the copse, unattended, to meet his death. Mithridates being risen took his bow and sword, for other arms he had none with him, mounted his horse and rode to the copse, through which, while he was yet some way off, he saw Nathan passing quite alone, and being minded before he fell upon him to see his face and hear the sound of his voice, as, riding at a smart pace, he came up with him, he laid hold of him by his headgear, exclaiming, "Greybeard, thou art a dead man." Whereto Nathan answered naught but, "Then 'tis but my desert." But Mithridates, hearing the voice and scanning the face, forthwith knew him for the same man that had welcomed him heartily, consorted with him familiarly, and counselled him faithfully, whereby his wrath presently subsided, and gave place to shame. Wherefore, casting away the sword that he had drawn in act to strike, he sprang from his horse, and weeping, threw himself at Nathan's feet, saying, "Your liberality, dearest father, I acknowledge to be beyond question, seeing with what craft you did but plot coming hither to yield me your life, for which, by mine own avowal, you knew that I, albeit cause I had none, did thirst. But God, more regardful of my duty than I myself, has now, in this moment of supreme stress, opened the eyes of my mind, that wretched envy had fast sealed. The prompter was your compliance. The greater is the debt of penitence that I owe you for my fault. Whereupon, wreak even such vengeance upon me as you may deem answerable to my transgression." But Nathan raised Mithridates to his feet, and tenderly embraced him, saying, "My son, thy enterprise, howsoever thou mayest denote it, whether evil or otherwise, was not such that thou shouldest crave, or I give, pardon thereof. For 'twas not in malice, but in that thou wouldest fain have been reputed better than I that thou ensuitedst it. Doubt then no more of me, nay, rest assured that none that lives bears thee such love as I, who know the loftiness of thy spirit, bent not to heap up wealth, as do the caitiffs, but to dispense in bounty thine accumulated store. Think it no shame that to enhance thy reputation thou wouldest have slain me, nor deem that I marvel thereat. To slay not one man, as thou wast minded, but countless multitudes, to waste whole countries with fire, and to raze cities to the ground, has been well nigh the sole art by which the mightiest emperors and the greatest kings have extended their dominions, and by consequence their fame. Wherefore, if thou, to increase thy fame, wouldest fain have slain me, 'twas nothing marvellous or strange, but wanted." Whereto Mithridates made answer not to excuse his wicked design, but to commend the seemly excuse found for it by Nathan, whom at length he told how beyond measure he marvelled that Nathan had not only been consenting to the enterprise, but had aided him therein by his counsel. But Nathan answered, "Liefer had I, Mithridates, for thou didst not marvel either at my consent or at my counsel, for that, since I was my own master and of a mind to that emprise whereupon thou art also bent, never a soul came to my house, but so far as in me lay, I gave him all that he asked of me. Thou camest lusting for my life, and so, when I heard thee crave it of me, I forthwith, that thou mightest not be the only guest to depart hence ill content, resolved to give it to thee, and to that end I gave thee such counsel as I deemed would serve thee both to the taking of my life and the preservation of thine own. Wherefore, yet again I bid thee, nay, I entreat thee, if so thou art minded, to take it for thy satisfaction. I know not how I could better bestow it. I have had the use of it now for some 80 years, and pleasure and solace thereof. And I know that, by the course of nature and the common lot of man, and all things mundane, it can continue to be mine but for a little while. And so I deem that 'twere much better to bestow it, as I have ever bestowed and dispensed my wealth, than to keep it, until, against my will, it be refit from me by nature. 'Twere but a trifle, though. 'Twere 100 years. How insignificant, then, the 6 or 8 years that are all I have to give. Take it, then, if thou hadst lief. Take it, I pray thee, for, long as I have lived here, none I have found but thee to desire it. Nor know I when I may find another, if thou take it not, to demand it of me. And, if peradventure I should find one, yet I know that the longer I keep it, the less its worth will be. Wherefore, ere it be thus cheapened, take it, I implore thee. Sore, shame-stricken, Mithridates made answer, Now God forfend that I should so much as harbour, as but now I did, such a thought, not to say do such a deed, as to wrest from you a thing as precious as your life, the years whereof, so far from abridging, I would gladly supplement with mine own. So then, rejoined Nathan promptly, thou wouldest, if thou couldst, add thy years to mine, and cause me to serve thee as I have never yet served any man, to wit, to take from thee that which is thine, I that never took aught from a soul. Aye, that I would, returned Mithridates. Then, quoth Nathan, do as I shall bid thee. Thou art young. Tarry here in my house, and call thyself Nathan, and I will get me to thy house, and ever call myself Mithridates. Whereto Mithridates made answer, Were I but able to discharge this trust, as you have been and are, scarce should I hesitate to accept your offer. But as too sure I am that aught I might do would but serve to lower Nathan's fame, and I am not minded to mar that in any other which I cannot mend in myself, and accept it I will not. After which, and the like interchange of delectable discourse, Nathan and Mithridates, by Nathan's desire, returned to the palace, where Nathan for some days honorably entreated Mithridates, and by his sage counsel confirmed and encouraged him in his high and noble resolve. After which, Mithridates, being minded to return home with his company, took leave of Nathan, fully persuaded that 'twas not possible to surpass him in liberality. End of Day 10, the third story.
Day 10, the fourth story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Philippa Jevons. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio, translated by J.M. Rigg. Day 10, the fourth story. Messer Gentile di Carisendi, being come from Modena, disinters a lady that he loves who had been buried for dead. She, being reanimated, gives birth to a male child, and Messer Gentile restores her with her son to Nicoluccio Caccianimico, her husband.
A thing marvellous seemed it to all, that for liberality a man should be ready to sacrifice his own life, and herein they averred that Nathan had without doubt left the King of Spain and the Abbot of Cluny behind. However, when they had discussed the matter diversely and at large, the king, bending his regard on Lauretta, signified to her his will that she should tell, and forthwith accordingly Lauretta began.
Goodly matters are they, and magnificent, that have been recounted to you, young ladies. Nay, so much of our field of discourse is already filled by their grandeur, that for us that are yet to tell there is, methinks, no room left, unless we seek our topic there where matter of discourse germane to every theme does most richly abound, to wit, in the affairs of love. For which cause, as also for that our time of life cannot but make us especially inclinable thereto, I am minded that my story shall be of a feat of magnificence done by a lover, which, all things considered, will peradventure seem to you inferior to none that have been shown you. So it be true that to possess the beloved one, men will part with their treasures, forget their enmities, and jeopardize their own lives, their honour, and their reputation in 1,000 ways. Know then that at Bologna, that most famous city of Lombardy, there dwelt a knight, Messer Gentile Carisendi by name, worshipful alike for his noble lineage and his native worth, who in his youth, being enamoured of a young gentlewoman named Madonna Catalina, wife of one Nicoluccio Caccianimico, and well nigh despairing, for that the lady gave him but a sorry requital of his love, betook him to Modena, being called thither as Podestà. Now, what time he was there, Nicoluccio being also away from Bologna, and his lady gone, for that she was with child, to lie in at a house she had some 3 miles or so from the city, it befell that she was suddenly smitten with a sore malady of such and so virulent a quality, that it left no sign of life in her, so that the very physicians pronounced her dead. And for that the women that were nearest of kin to her professed to have been told by her that she was not so far gone in pregnancy that the child could be perfectly formed, they, without more ado, laid her in a tomb in a neighbouring church, and after long lamentation closed it upon her. Whereof Messer Gentile, being forthwith apprised by one of his friends, did, for all she had been most niggardly to him of her favour, grieve not a little, and at length fell a communing with himself on this wise: So, Madonna Catalina, thou art dead. While thou livest, never a glance of thine might I have, wherefore, now that thou art dead, 'tis but right that I go take a kiss from thee. 'Twas night while he thus mused, and forthwith, observing strict secrecy in his departure, he got him to horse with a single servant, and halted not until he was come to the place where the lady was interred, and having opened the tomb, he cautiously entered it. Then, having lain down beside her, he set his face against hers, and again, weeping profusely the while, he kissed it. But as 'tis matter of common knowledge that the desires of men, and more especially of lovers, know no bounds, but crave ever an ampler satisfaction, even so Messer Gentile, albeit he had been minded to tarry there no longer, now said to himself, wherefore touch I not her bosom a while? I have never yet touched it, nor shall I ever touch it again. Obeying which impulse, he laid his hand on her bosom, and keeping it there some time, felt, as he thought, her heart faintly beating. Whereupon, banishing all fear, and examining the body with closer attention, he discovered that life was not extinct, though he judged it but scant and flickering, and so, aided by his servant, he bore her as gently as he might out of the tomb, and set her before him upon his horse, and brought her privily to his house at Bologna, where dwelt his wise and worthy mother, who, being fully apprised by him of the circumstances, took pity on the lady, and had a huge fire kindled and a bath made ready, whereby she restored her to life. Whereof the first sign she gave was to heave a great sigh, and murmur, Alas, where am I? To which the worthy lady made answer, Be of good cheer, thou art well lodged. By and by the lady, coming to herself, looked about her, and finding herself she knew not where, and seeing Messer Gentile before her, was filled with wonder, and besought his mother to tell her how she came to be there. Messer Gentile thereupon told her all. Sore distressed thereat, the lady after a while thanked him as best she might, after which she besought him by the love that he had borne her, and of his courtesy, that she might, while she tarried in his house, be spared aught that could impair her honour and her husband's, and that at daybreak he would suffer her to return home. Madam, replied Messer Gentile, however I did affect you in time past, since God in his goodness has by means of the love I bore you restored you to me alive, I mean not now or at any time hereafter to entreat you either here or elsewhere, save as a dear sister. But yet the service I have tonight rendered you merits some guerdon, and therefore lief had I that you deny me not a favour which I shall ask of you. Whereto the lady graciously made answer that she would be prompt to grant it, so only it were in her power, and consonant with her honour. Said then Messer Gentile, Your kinsfolk, madam, one and all, nay, all the folk in Bologna, are fully persuaded that you are dead. There is therefore none to expect you at home, wherefore the favour I crave of you is this, that you will be pleased to tarry privily here with my mother, until such time, which will be speedily, as I return from Modena. And 'tis for that I purpose to make solemn and joyous donation of you to your husband, in presence of the most honourable folk of this city, that I ask of you this grace. Mindful of what she owed the knight, and witting that what he craved was seemly, the lady, albeit she yearned not a little to gladden her kinsfolk with the sight of her in the flesh, consented to do as Messer Gentile besought her, and thereto pledged him her faith. And scarce had she done so, when she felt that the hour of her travail was come, and so, tenderly succoured by Messer Gentile's mother, she not long after gave birth to a fine boy, which event did mightily enhance her own and Messer Gentile's happiness. Then, having made all meet provision for her, and left word that she was to be tended as if she were his own wife, Messer Gentile, observing strict secrecy, returned to Modena. His time of office there ended, in anticipation of his return to Bologna, he appointed for the morning of his arrival in the city a great and goodly banquet at his house, whereto were bidden not a few of the gentlemen of Bologna, and among them Nicoluccio Caccianimico, whom, when he was returned and dismounted, he found awaiting him, as also the lady, fairer and more healthful than ever, and her little son doing well, and so with a gladness beyond compare he ranged his guests at table, and regaled them with many a course magnificently served. And towards the close of the feast, having premonished the lady of his intention, and concerted her with how she should behave, thus he spoke: "Gentlemen, I mind me to have once heard tell of, as I deem it, a delightsome custom which they have in Persia, to wit, that when one would do his friend especial honour, he bids him to his house, and there shows him that treasure, be it wife or mistress or daughter or what not, that he holds most dear, assuring him that yet more gladly, were it possible, he would show him his heart. Which custom I am minded to observe here in Bologna. You of your courtesy have honoured my feast with your presence, and I propose to do you honour in the Persian fashion, by showing you that which in all the world I do and must ever hold most dear. But before I do so, tell me, I pray you, how you conceive of a nice question that I shall lay before you. Suppose that one has in his house a good and most faithful servant, who falls sick of a grievous disorder, and that the master tarries not for the death of the servant, but has him borne out into the open street, and concerns himself no more with him, that then a stranger comes by, is moved to pity of the sick man, and takes him to his house, and by careful tendance and at no small cost restores him to his wonted health. Now I would fain know whether the first master has in equity any just cause to complain of, or be aggrieved with the second master, if he retain the servant in his employ, and refuse to restore him when so required. The gentlemen discussed the matter after diverse fashions, and all agreed in one sentence, which they committed to Nicoluccio Caccianimico, for that he was an eloquent and accomplished speaker, to deliver on the part of them all. Nicoluccio began by commending the Persian custom, after which he said that he and the others were all of the same opinion, to wit, that the first master had no longer any right in his servant, since he had not only abandoned but cast him forth, and that by virtue of the second master's kind usage of him, he must be deemed to have become his servant, wherefore by keeping him he did the first master no mischief, no violence, no wrong. Whereupon the rest that were at the table said one and all, being worthy men, that their judgment jumped with Nicoluccio's answer. The knight, well pleased with the answer, and that 'twas Nicoluccio that gave it, affirmed that he was of the same opinion, adding, "'Tis now time that I show you that honour which I promised you." He then called two of his servants, and sent them to the lady, whom he had caused to be apparelled and adorned with splendour, charging them to pray her to be pleased to come and gladden the gentlemen with her presence. So she, bearing in her arms her most lovely little son, came, attended by the two servants, into the saloon, and by the knight's direction took a seat beside a worthy gentleman, whereupon, "Gentlemen," quoth the knight, This is the treasure that I hold, and mean ever to hold, more dear than aught else. Behold, and judge whether I have good cause." The gentleman said not a little in her honour and praise, averring that the knight ought indeed to hold her dear. Then, as they regarded her more attentively, there were not a few that would have pronounced her to be the very woman that she was, had they not believed that woman to be dead. But none scanned her so closely as Nicoluccio, who, the knight being withdrawn a little space, could no longer refrain his eager desire to know who she might be, but asked her whether she were of Bologna or from other parts. The lady, hearing her husband's voice, could scarce forbear to answer, but yet, not to disconcert the knight's plan, she kept silence. Another asked her if that was her little boy, and yet another if she were Messer Gentile's wife, or in any other wise his connection, to none of whom she vouchsafed an answer. Then Messer Gentile coming up, "Sir," quoth one of the guests, "this treasure of yours is goodly indeed, but she seems to be dumb. Is she so?" "Gentlemen," quoth Messer Gentile, "that she has not as yet spoken is no small evidence of her virtue." "Then tell us you who she is," returned the other. "That," quoth the knight, "will I right gladly, so you but promise me that, no matter what I may say, none of you will stir from his place until I have ended my story." All gave the required promise, and when the tables had been cleared, Messer Gentile, being seated beside the lady, thus spoke: "Gentlemen, this lady is that loyal and faithful servant, touching whom a brief while ago I propounded to you my question, whom her own folk held none too dear, but cast out into the open street as a thing vile and no longer good for aught. But I took thence, and by my careful tendance wrested from the clutch of death, whom God, regardful of my good will, has changed from the appalling aspect of a corpse to the thing of beauty that you see before you. But for your fuller understanding of this occurrence, I will briefly explain it to you." He then recounted to them in detail all that had happened from his first becoming enamoured of the lady to that very hour, whereto they hearkened with no small wonder. After which, "And so," he added, "unless you, and more especially Nicoluccio, are now of another opinion than you were a brief while ago, the lady rightly belongs to me, nor can any man lawfully reclaim her of me." None answered, for all were intent to hear what more he would say. But while Nicoluccio and some others that were there wept for sympathy, Messer Gentile stood up and took the little boy in his arms and the lady by the hand, and approached Nicoluccio, saying, "Rise, my gossip. I do not indeed restore thee thy wife, whom thy kinsfolk and hers cast forth, but I am minded to give thee this lady, my gossip, with this her little boy, whom I know well to be thy son, and whom I held at the font and named Gentile; and I pray that she be not the less dear to thee for that she has tarried 3 months in my house, for I swear to thee that God, who peradventure ordained that I should be enamoured of her, to the end that my love might be, as it has been, the occasion of her restoration to life, that never with her father or her mother, or with thee, did she live more virtuously than with my mother in my house." Which said, he turned to the lady, saying, "Madam, I now release you from all promises made to me, and so deliver you to Nicoluccio." Then, leaving the lady and the child in Nicoluccio's embrace, he returned to his seat. Thus to receive his wife and son was to Nicoluccio a delight great in the measure of its remoteness from his hope, wherefore in the most honourable terms at his command he thanked the knight, whom all the rest, weeping for sympathy, greatly commended for what he had done, as did also all that heard thereof. The lady, welcomed home with wondrous cheer, was long a portent to the Bolognese, who gazed on her as one raised from the dead. Messer Gentile lived ever after as the friend of Nicoluccio, and his and the lady's kinsfolk. Now, what shall be your verdict, gracious ladies? A king's largesse, though it was of his sceptre and crown, an abbot's reconciliation at no cost to himself of a malefactor with the Pope, or an old man's submission of his throat to the knife of his enemy, will you adjudge that such acts as these are comparable to the deed of Messer Gentile, who, though young and burning with passion, and deeming himself justly entitled to that which the heedlessness of another had discarded, and he by good fortune had recovered, not only tempered his ardour with honour, but having that which with his whole soul he had long been bent on wresting from another, did with liberality restore it? Assuredly none of the feats aforesaid seem to me like unto this. End of Day 10, the 4th story.
Day 10, the 5th story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Anna Simon. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio, translated by J.M. Rigg. Day 10, the 5th story. Madonna Dionara craves of Messer Ansaldo a garden that shall be as fair in January as in May. Messer Ansaldo binds himself to a necromancer, and thereby gives her the garden. Her husband gives her leave to do Messer Ansaldo's pleasure. He, being apprised of her husband's liberality, releases her from her promise, and the necromancer releases Messer Ansaldo from his bond, and will take naught of his.
Each of the gay company had with superlative commendation extolled Messer Gentile to the skies. When the king bade Emilia follow suit, and with a good courage, as burning to speak, thus Emilia began.
Delicate my ladies, none can justly say that 'twas not magnificently done of Messer Gentile, but if it be alleged that 'twas the last degree of magnificence, 'twill perchance not be difficult to show that more was possible, as is my purpose in the little story that I shall tell you. In Friuli, a country which, though its air is shrewd, is pleasantly diversified by fine mountains and not a few rivers and clear fountains, is a city called Udine, where dwelt of yore a fair and noble lady, Madonna Dionara by name, wife of a wealthy grandee named Giliberto, a very pleasant gentleman and debonair. Now this lady, for her high qualities, was in the last degree beloved by a great and noble baron, Messer Ansaldo Gradense by name, a man of no little consequence, and whose fame for feats of arms and courtesy was spread far and wide. But, though with all a lover's ardour he left naught undone that he might do to win her love, and to that end frequently plied her with his ambassages, 'twas all in vain, and the lady being distressed by his importunity, and chat, refuse as she might all that he asked of her, he none the less continued to love her and press his suit upon her, bethought her how she might rid herself of him by requiring of him an extraordinary, and, as she deemed, impossible feat. So one day a woman that came oftentimes from him to her being with her, "Good woman," quoth she, "thou hast many a time affirmed that Messer Ansaldo loves me above all else, and thou hast made proffer to me on his part of wondrous rich gifts which I am minded he keep to himself, for that I could never bring myself to love him or pleasure him for their sake. But if I might be certified that he loves me as much as thou sayest, then without a doubt I should not fail to love him, and do his pleasure. Wherefore, so he give me the assurance that I shall require, I shall be at his command." "What is it, madam," returned the good woman, "that you would have him do?" "This," replied the lady, "I would have this next ensuing January, hard by this city, a garden full of green grass and flowers and flowering trees, just as if it were May. And if he cannot provide me with this garden, bid him never again send either thee or any other to me, for that, should he harass me any further, I shall no longer keep silence, as I have hitherto done, but shall make my complaint to my husband and all my kinsmen, and it shall go hard but I will be quit of him." The gentleman being apprised of his lady's stipulation and promise, notwithstanding that he deemed it no easy matter, nay, a thing almost impossible, to satisfy her, and knew besides that 'twas but to deprive him of all hope that she made the demand, did nevertheless resolve to do his endeavour to comply with it, and causing search to be made in divers parts of the world, if any he might find to afford him counsel or aid, he lit upon one who for a substantial reward offered to do the thing by necromancy. So Messer Ansaldo, having struck the bargain with him for an exceeding great sum of money, gleefully accepted the appointed time. Which being come with extreme cold, insomuch that there was naught but snow and ice, the adept, on the night before the calends of January, wrought with his spells to such purpose, that on the morrow, as was averred by eye-witnesses, there appeared in a meadow hard by the city one of the most beautiful gardens that was ever seen, with no lack of grass and trees and fruits of all sorts. At sight whereof Messer Ansaldo was overjoyed, and caused some of the finest fruits and flowers that it contained to be gathered, and privily presented to his lady, whom he bade come and see the garden that she had craved, that thereby she might have assurance of his love, and mind her of the promise that she had given him, and confirmed with an oath, and, as a loyal lady, take thought for its performance. When she saw the flowers and fruits, the lady, who had already heard not a few folk speak of the wondrous garden, began to repent her of her promise. But for all that, being fond of strange sights, she hied her with many other ladies of the city to see the garden, and having gazed on it with wonderment, and commended it not a little, she went home the saddest woman alive, bethinking her to what it bound her. And so great was her distress that she might not well conceal it, but being written on her face, 'twas marked by her husband, who was minded by all means to know the cause thereof. The lady long time kept silence, but at last she yielded to his urgency, and discovered to him the whole matter from first to last. Whereat Giliberto was at first very wroth, but on second thoughts, considering the purity of the lady's purpose, he was better advised, and dismissing his anger, "Dianora," quoth he, "'tis not the act of a discreet or virtuous lady to give ear to messages of such a sort, nor to enter into any compact touching her chastity with any man on any terms. Words that the ears convey to the heart have a potency greater than is commonly supposed, and there is scarce aught that lovers will not find possible. 'Twas then ill done of thee in the first instance to hearken, as afterwards to make the compact, but, for that I know the purity of thy soul, that thou mayst be quit of thy promise, I will grant thee that which perchance no other man would grant, being also swayed thereto by fear of the necromancer, whom Messer Ansaldo, shouldst thou play him false, might peradventure cause to do as a mischief. I am minded then that thou go to him, and contrive, if on any wise thou canst, to get thee quit of this promise without loss of virtue. But if otherwise it may not be, then for the nonce thou mayst yield him thy body, but not thy soul." Whereat the lady, weeping, would none of such a favour at her husband's hand. But Giliberto, for all the lady's protestations, was minded that so it should be. Accordingly, on the morrow, about dawn, apparelled none too ornately, preceded by 2 servants and followed by a chambermaid, the lady hied her to Messer Ansaldo's house. Apprised that his lady was come to see him, Messer Ansaldo, marvelling not a little, rose, and having called the necromancer, "I am minded," quoth he, "that thou see what goodly gain I have gotten by thine art." And the twain having met the lady, Ansaldo gave way to no unruly appetite, but received her with a seemly obeisance, and then the 3 repaired to a goodly chamber, where there was a great fire, and, having caused the lady to be seated, thus spoke Ansaldo: "Madam, if the love that I have so long borne you merit any guerdon, I pray you that it be not grievous to you to discover to me the true occasion of your coming to me at this hour, and thus accompanied." Shamefast, and the tears all but standing in her eyes, the lady made answer: "Sir, 'tis neither love that I bear you, nor faith that I pledged you, that brings me hither, but the command of my husband, who, regarding rather the pains you have had of your unbridled passion than his own or my honour, has sent me hither, and for that he commands it, I, for the nonce, am entirely at your pleasure." If Messer Ansaldo had marvelled to hear of the lady's coming, he now marvelled much more, and touched by Giliberto's liberality, and passing from passion to compassion, "Now God forbid, madam," quoth he, "that, it being as you say, I should wound the honour of him that has compassion on my love. Wherefore no otherwise than as if you were my sister shall you abide here, while you are so minded, and be free to depart at your pleasure. Nor crave I aught of you but that you shall convey from me to your husband such thanks as you shall deem meet for courtesy such as his has been, and entreat me ever henceforth as your brother and servant. Whereat, overjoyed in the last degree, "Naught," quoth the lady, "by what I noted of your behaviour, could ever have caused me to anticipate other sequel of my coming hither than this which I see is your will, and for which I shall ever be your debtor." She then took her leave, and, attended by a guard of honour, returned to Giliberto, and told him what had passed, between whom and Messer Ansaldo there was henceforth a most close and loyal friendship. Now the liberality shown by Giliberto towards Messer Ansaldo, and by Messer Ansaldo towards the lady, having been marked by the necromancer, when Messer Ansaldo made ready to give him the promised reward, "Now God forbid," quoth he, "that, as I have seen Giliberto liberal in regard of his honour, and you liberal in regard of your love, I be not in like manner liberal in regard of my reward, which accordingly, witting that 'tis in good hands, I am minded that you keep." The knight was abashed, and strove hard to induce him to take, if not the whole, at least a part of the money; but, finding that his labour was in vain, and that the necromancer, having caused his garden to vanish after the third day, was minded to depart, he bade him adieu; and the carnal love he had borne the lady being spent, he burned for her thereafter with a flame of honourable affection. Now what shall be our verdict in this case, lovesome ladies? A lady as it were dead, and a love grown lukewarm for utter hopelessness. Shall we set a liberality shown in such a case above this liberality of Messer Ansaldo, loving yet as ardently, and hoping perchance yet more ardently than ever, and holding in his hands the prize that he had so long pursued? Folly indeed should I deem it to compare that liberality with this. End of Day 10, the 5th story.